Alex, this is so fascinating, and I really appreciate you putting everything in this sort of historic perspective because it does help understand what's the current events and the precedent that was set before. And this is absolutely fascinating. So I really appreciate you walking us through your understanding of what's going on right now. And I agree with you. I think those are the links and connections that shouldn't be ignored. Let's consider the China angle too. Before the meeting with Xi Jinping, Trump executed a coup in Venezuela, as you just mentioned. He also bombed Nigeria, and both of those countries actually supply energy to China. Iran was, of course, meant to be the crown jewel. Well, it didn't really work out. And not only did Iran manage to withstand the US-Israel attempt to incite protests domestically late last year, but also Iran has shown that it is a strong adversary and it cannot be defeated by the United States and Israel, the two strongest military powers in the Middle East and globally, in the case of the United States, with conventional military tools. So when Trump went to Beijing, he didn't
Well,
really have the cards that he wanted to use as leverage against China, it seems. And so is it fair to say that today's US conflicts primarily focus on securing access to natural resources in order to contain China vis-a-vis those resources?
yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I would definitely agree with that, and uh, it's almost obvious because, well, actually, no. Just to make it a bit more precise, they don't care uh, whether China has access to natural resources, so long as we control the financial flows that follow out of the exploitation of those financial resources. Because no, if China controls their own natural wealth, if they control their own infrastructure, the Chinese might squander all that money on high-speed railways, new technology development, science, advancing the living standards of the Chinese people. Whereas, the Western financial institutions and Western political class, they tend to favor investing in military industrial complex and weaponry and military bases and armies and so forth. So, if Chinese corporations would become clients of Citigroup and JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and Royal Bank of Scotland and so forth, and allow them to fund their development and allow BlackRock and Vanguard to 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 take controlling shareholding interest, and then you would have their directors taking directorship positions at Chinese corporations, and everything would be fine. We would be friends. But at that point, the decisions about how to allocate a society's wealth and credit and what direction in which you would guide the future development of the society would look very, very different. And then, China might have as many miles of high-speed rail network as the United States does, which is, very close to nothing. And I think this really is a conflict between two systems of governance. And there's a system that uplifts everyone from poverty, that raises everybody's standards of living and creates an affluent society and a civilization. And then you have system, which is, the Western imperialistic neocolonialist system, which has a very, very strong tendency to go in the direction of the Western Roman Empire, meaning complete and total collapse with nothing left. A race to the bottom into the dark ages. And we really are on that trajectory. But the people who hold the levers of power and who are chief beneficiaries of this system, they're not going to give up. They don't have a plan B. They're not going to stop and say, well, maybe this is not the best way forward. Maybe we should rethink. That does happen, you do have reformers that emerge even from the ruling class, but they're usually very quickly done away with. They're
Mhm.
very, very quickly politically disenfranchised or simply murdered. Like, Julius Caesar was murdered. Um, all eight American presidents who wanted to change the system of governance uh, were either assassinated or died under suspicious circumstances while in office. Um, Abraham Lincoln, JFK, McKinley, Garfield. They were generally all done away with for the same reason. They wanted to return economic sovereignty to the United States, invest in infrastructure, domestic industries, and so forth. Introduce tariffs on foreign trade, and this doesn't suit globalist goals because the empire wants um, global free trade.
The Trump administration has been drawing down on its strategic petroleum reserve. And as we all understand, it is not bottomless. And according to Bloomberg, the United States may actually run out of oil by early July. And as we all know, across Asia, fuel rationing has already become a reality. So it's a very uh, disturbing and concerning situation that I think many mainstream media and political leaders are just sort of choosing to ignore right now, but it's not that far away if things continue as they have been, and especially if the United States carries out an attack on Iran again. So with global oil inventories falling so rapidly, how close are we to the actual shortages rather than just higher prices and, higher bond yields, more uncertainty? How close are we to actual shortages that would likely involve rationing and really not having the energy to operate hospitals and infrastructure and everything in between?
Well, I don't know exactly the answer to that question, Lena. I've seen the in Europe we supposedly already have run out of reserves of jet fuel. The United States is going to follow suit this summer. The reserves of diesel are at historic lows. They've absolutely fallen off the cliff. So there are projections that we're going to be running out of stuff and there's going to be shortage and so forth. Um, I don't know how much of that is true and how much of that can be mitigated. But I think that we should consider the risk that we're going to end up in some kind of a 1970s um, oil shortage environment, that we're going to have to see rationing of fuel, maybe forcing drivers to drive, on alternative days, depending on your driver's license. All of those things are probably coming our way. I don't know. I don't know how soon that might happen because it'll depend on this summer, if the travel season is going to really, really be really, really busy, which I think it won't. So it's possible that demand will go down as well. So
Mhm.
if both demand and supply goes down, well, that softens the blow a little bit. But one thing that is certain is that the prices are going to be higher and they might go to levels that nobody's prepared for today. So unfortunately, I don't, I'm not comfortable making any kind of a more specific prediction than this, but very definitely this crisis will not be resolved easily. I think that I think that the resolution of the crisis will have to go the political route.
Mhm.
That the European Union is going to have to fall, disintegrate. the NATO is going to have to disintegrate. The wars are going to have to stop. And then what I find very fascinating with regards to the Hormuz situation as a possibility that, I think that the Iranians could very easily make peace with their neighbors, with, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, and say, guess what? We're going to open the Strait of Hormuz. So you will be free to export everything that you were exporting before, but so long as you trade it in Chinese yuan or another currency, but no more petrodollar. So that would be a very, very big blow for the West, and it would trigger that would really push us into a Weimar Republic type financial crisis, which means hyperinflation, depression, very, very severe market disruptions, breakdown of trade, and so forth. Um, in 2012, um, anticipating some of these geopolitical crises, not exactly, these scenarios, but understanding that the post-war global order would unravel, the British Ministry of Defense published a research paper in which they projected that by 2040 the price of oil would go to $500 a barrel.
Mhm.
And so I think that actually that type of a scenario actually becomes possible.
It certainly seems that way. And I'm glad that you brought up the petrodollar because when we talk about the energy markets, I think we often end up talking about the petrodollar. Of course, the use of the dollar is as the settlement currency in energy trade has solidified the status of the dollar as the global reserve currency. So this should not be underestimated. I know some Western commentators and experts like to say that the petrodollar is never going to be overthrown. But we already see cracks and we already see countries of the global south or the global majority try to devise ways to create alternative settlement platforms. Do you feel that the Iran war actually accelerated the decline of the petrodollar system in a meaningful way?
I think there's no doubt about that because the Iranians fully well understand what they're up against. And so they immediately, when they closed the Strait of Hormuz, one of the conditions that they put on the traffic is that it has to be paid for in Chinese yuan. Um, Maybe other, currencies like Russian ruble or Indian rupee. And my understanding was also, even though I don't know if this, it hasn't been discussed officially, but my understanding is that they also offered that same deal to the Europeans. Like if your cargoes are paid for in euros, then you may pass. Now, the reason why this is very interesting is because it kind of pushes a wedge between the Europeans and the Americans, because one of the Achilles heels of the European economies and financial system is that, the bulk of global trade is still conducted in US dollars. And so European banks and trading companies have to have adequate US dollar liquidity in order to be able to pay for imports. And so this has been in crisis period, this becomes a problem. And so the Federal Reserve Bank had to uh, issue these swap lines to European financial institutions so that the European trade doesn't grind down to a halt. But this is something that the Americans can withdraw at any point in time, putting the Europeans in a very subservient position. So European bankers have been very, very worried that the Americans might yank, particularly under Trump, these swap lines away from them, and then they would not be able to pay for imports of oil, gas, coal, whatever, whatever they have to import from elsewhere around the world, which would cause then the crises of shortages in European markets and hyperinflation and all of these things, basically a collapse of European economies. So if the Iranians reached out to the Europeans to say like, well, guess what? You can pay for your cargoes in Europe and then you can make them pass. That gives the Europeans a way to address their vulnerability to the American bankers, to the Federal Reserve System. And you know, the Saudis would never offer this. The Emiratis or Qataris would never offer this. But now the new sheriff in town are the Iranians, and they can. They have the stature and the military power that they can dictate conditions. So I think all of these little moves indicate that the Iranians absolutely understand what the chink in the armor is of the Western Empire, and they are determined to destroy that. And so I think that Iranians, with support from China and Russia, will probably continue trying to dismantle the petrodollar system. And I think that the easy solution would be to open the Strait of Hormuz conditional that the trade is not conducted in US dollars.
I would like to go back quickly to the very beginning of this conversation. You said that, due to, and this is not, you alluded to Trump's post on Truth Social, where he announced that the strike on Iran had been planned but called off after the Gulf states appealed. And my question to that was, well, how much does that appeal actually have to do with the GCC now being actually actively opposed to restarting the war? Is this based on their infrastructure as the main source of revenue, oil revenue being damaged or destroyed? And if so, then why didn't they do this? Why didn't they actively oppose back in February before the United States and Israel launched the initial attack? Because surely the UAE, for example, is an ally of Israel and the United States, and it likely believed, their joint intel that Iran would fall in just within days of the initial attack. But even so, it seems that the GCC countries' survival instincts have to be stronger than the instincts of a vassal state and the one that's fully committed to serving someone else's interests. So why, if what Trump said is true and the attack was indeed called off based on the Gulf states' appeal, why didn't they make such a strong appeal back in February to prevent the destruction of their own infrastructure?
The only way I can explain that, Lena, is I think that they all bought into the Israeli bill of goods, that they were convinced that uh, like a blitzkrieg against Iran would quickly topple the regime, that everything would be over in a couple of days, and there wouldn't be a wider war. So I think that the UAE were fully bought into the agenda. I think others maybe thought, okay, we'll close our eyes, get it over with, and we'll accept the results. But I think that none of them expected that Iran would emerge as the dominant power in their neighborhood. Well, that did happen, and now it's very clear. And so now they have to craft their future in cooperation with Iran. And the Iranians are almost certainly going to demand that they evict foreign military bases from their territories. Uh, Iran is perfectly in position to demand that they no longer trade their exports in US dollars. And so I think all of that is coming, which again brings us back to those incentives, meaning that the Western Empire will not allow for this to stand. So probably uh, they are going to go back and try to overthrow the Iranian regime in one way or another. Uh, Maybe Trump will try to delay it until after the midterm elections. Um, but if they are unsuccessful, if they fail, if they can't overthrow the Iranian regime, if they can't prevail against Russia in Ukraine, if they can't recover their colonies in, you know, Western Africa, then I think the only solution they have are the printing presses. And so we're going to see hyperinflation in Europe, hyperinflation in Britain, hyperinflation in Japan. I think maybe the United States will be able to engineer a bit of a softer landing, but the Western world is facing a huge crisis ahead. And I think that it's going to be comparable to the Weimar Republic unraveling or collapse of the Soviet Union.
Yes, there's really no light at the end of the tunnel at the moment. Seems that way. Alex, and maybe the last question for you for today. Iran has made it clear that it is a master of asymmetric warfare, of course, and it has to be when it is attacked by the a nuclear power such as the United
Mm.
States, and also nuclear power in the Middle East, with the strongest army in the Middle East, Israel. And it made it clear that if it is attacked again, it is willing to inflict enormous, truly enormous economic cost on all parties, on all belligerents to the conflict, and by default, on really the rest of the world. Because the economy is globalized and it is, even though it's been fragmenting, it is still very much interconnected. So, with the assumption that the continuation of the war is imminent in one way or another, whether it is now or several months from now after the midterms, what would you say is the most dangerous escalation scenario that Iran may consider as a form of asymmetric warfare against the United States and Israel aggression?
Oh, I think very definitely the destruction of the energy infrastructure in the region. Because we've now had a very significant disruption in the oil market, but that disruption has taken off an estimated 8 to 12% of global crude oil supply off the market. If they went and destroyed the rest of the region's oil production facilities, in the pipelines and the export terminals and so forth, it could take up to 32% of all crude oil off the markets. So that would be absolutely disastrous for the global economy. And I think that the Iranians will try to avoid that because if it comes to that, then it's not going to be just the Western powers that are going to be hurt. It's going to be very hurtful for India and for China, who are Iran's well, not so much India, but China is Iran's ally, and they would prefer that there be minimum disruption to global trade and economy. But the empire doesn't play nice. They don't care about minimizing damage. They just care about overthrowing the Iranian regime. And I think that they will never relent until they are completely defeated, and we're not there yet. I think that's going to be a continued fight. Same thing for Russia. They're not going to allow Russia to just simply prevail in their conflict with Ukraine and then say like, well, too bad we lost, you won. Let's get on with life. No, they're just going to start weaponizing the remainder of European countries to uh, to continue the war against Russia. They will never stop, Lena. That's the problem until they are completely defeated.
Alex, I really appreciate your insights, and it's been such a fascinating conversation. I wish we could continue, but we're running into 1 hour mark, and I look forward to having you on the program again so that we may continue the conversation and discuss this in greater detail. To our viewers, I encourage you to follow Alex on X as well as on Substack. His Substack is amazing and it is a must read, so definitely check it out. Alex, thank you so much for your time and being so generous with it today. I look forward to having you on again.
Thank you for the invite, Lena, and until the next time.